It is easy for anyone to sit in their ivory sniper tower and wax philosophical about how in a world filled with the undead, it is still man that is the true monster. But have any of those people ever had human jaws gnashing away at their insides? No. No matter what way you dress them, zombies are the main issue in a zombie apocalypse, and I don't think I've played a game that's quite understood that just as well as Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter, thanks to its utterly bizarre zombie tower. Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter is proof that some companies should really start taking their April Fool gags seriously. In it, you and up to 9 others will take on shambling simpletons by flicking bullets into their heads. It's simple, unabashed fun, and perhaps the most terrifying dexterity game I've ever played. I am not kidding. Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter is you completing a series of objectives whilst holding off writhing rotters that know nothing of personal space. While the game's mechanics slowly evolve over the course of 10 scenarios, the base actions throughout remain the same. On your turn, you can take a survivor and either move them by replacing them with a Roomba, flicking that across the table to represent a swift jog, or place a metallic pellet, /knife, /baseball bat, whatever you fancy, right next to you, and fire it at your enemies, hoping to knock them over and send them right where they belong, in the zombie bin. It's so simple that, frankly, I'm surprised my review of the original took 9 minutes. Anyway, redirect your bullets away from your friends and towards the dead that are constantly shambling over to you. While the game lacks a hefty dose of snow to warrant the spin-off, it makes up for it with the sheer number of zombies coating the table. Zombies you have no control over. Hardly surprising really, they can't even control their own intestines. And that makes this variant feel far deadlier than what it's been spun off from, because whilst both have copious amounts of corpses, only Flick 'em Up has the architectural abnormality of the zombie tower. I know it looks like the back of a garbage truck, but trust me, this is probably the greatest gimmick I've seen in a game ever. If a player makes a loud sound, like firing a gun, not sneezing, then a zombie rush is executed. The closest zombie left standing turns towards your survivor and summons forth the zombie tower behind them. They then grab 2 of their closest friends to join them on the top of the tower before taking a plunge, and that determines their new placements, albeit face flat for now. All it needs is a bit of gunge for it to go full get your own back, and less implied violence. Beyond this, representing the fetid footsteps making their way towards you though, it also gives a chance for those jaws to dig into your tender muscle fibres, or lack thereof. You see, if one of your pals is knocked down by a zombie rush, they lose life. And if they lose all their lives, they're taken out of town and buried back in the box. I know it's not very respectful, but it's the best we could do during the zombie apocalypse, I swear. A good deal of board games focus on your classic 60s Romero shamblers, recognising their strength is in numbers. In more combat-focused games, their movement is often represented by actions which have some level of predictability, only committing to melee attacks and stumbling X spaces, meaning often the undead monstrosities we're truly scared of are the bizarre mutations Left 4 Dead inspired. They may work well with their respective systems, but it does feel like they reduce the zombie into nothing but a rotting grunt. After decades of digging through the catacombs looking for zombie content, it's easy to see why we're confident enough to look at these shamblers and go, yeah, we can take them on, no question. So much so that we now have self-appointed zombie survival experts for something that hasn't even happened yet. I saw one of these guys the other day say they could easily headshot 20 of these things in one fell swoop, and I'm just like, what the f***? You're not Neo. But this peripheral, whilst predictable in its movements as it stands behind the zombie closest to the player who caught their attention, is remarkably unpredictable when the bodies hit the floor. At least if these were dice, you could put odds on where these buggers would land. But the beauty of dexterity games with peculiarly shaped components is its perfect grounds for unpredictability. A perfect level for competitive games, but shockingly worrying when utilised correctly in cooperative games, and one which actually has you thinking like you're in a zombie apocalypse. Instead of confidently sitting there and stating that you can pull off feats of murder like your arms were made of cannons, you're sitting there looking for vantage points, scouring the area, seeing where you need to go for vital supplies and whether or not you can get there in time before the city is overrun, like your life depends on it. Because it does. And you might want to shift that responsibility onto somebody else. That's fine, I won't judge. You're still human. Why are you bleeding there? The reach of some of these things is frankly ludicrous, taking anyone that takes them for granted aback. Sometimes running away to disperse the zombies and create an opening is a better option than staying put and firing a gun, but will guarantee that when the round ends, more zombies will hoard the board and potentially end the game by overrunning the table. I can't think of another tabletop game that has genuinely made me worried for my well-being and my team's when going up against a group of zombies that I've been pretty accustomed to throughout my entire life, that are slow, plodding along, that should be easy to deal with. But the more I think about it, the more I realise how I play this, wondering whether I should shoot a zombie or weave through them to my actual objective, is a lot like how I used to play old survival horror games, most notably Resident Evil.
Early Resi games were great at stacking the odds against you, even if only one zombie was coming your way. While the numbers against you were low, the spaces were tight, the camera angles masterfully orchestrated the scares, and the protagonist had all the combat readiness of a carousel with a pistol blue tacked to it. As titles moved into more open spaces, the carousel was greased and more combat control was given. But hordes came in to balance the playing field and would lash out unpredictably. Hanging back became harder to do, but players were encouraged to stun weaklings and deliver roundhouse kicks to obliterate groups and reward those moments of tension with room to breathe. Some titles, however, never really played around with this balance, ultimately giving the player excessive control in combat-heavy scenarios, reducing their once signature monster into nothing but bullet-spewing fodder. The best survival horror games put this dread in your head, make you second-guess your shots, forcing you to stomp out your anxieties to focus on who you should be taking out next. And it's hard to encapsulate that anxiety in a board game when time is dictated by the laws of turns and rounds.
And this rotting, blood-stained heart of the game just takes on these elements of survival so well. No member of your team is safe as this thing mimics the absolute savagery of a zombie lunging towards you, going in for the kill. This is not just a clever reframing of the original's mechanics, it's a really good zombie game outright. There's a part in the Walking Dead comics that I've never been able to get out of my head, and I couldn't tell why until I played this game. Upon being forced out of a relatively sheltered life by end of the world standards, a group of survivors are educated on just how the zombies have grown as a threat over time. They haven't grown tendrils nor evolved into different variants, but have had time to form herds. Sound naturally attracts a zombie, but that sound could even be as minor as one of their own knocking a doorknob. A small group can approach what they think is meat, but will inevitably get distracted by another sound once they've found nothing to feast on, perhaps caused by another group of undead. And eventually these groups trying to find prey have formed a herd that can ensnare it simply by existing. A dangerous and effective trap formed entirely by the misguided. I love it because it perfectly articulates how something so stupid can become such a threat. And in a world where one bite and you're out, that's a lot of bites you can accidentally run into, especially when there ain't enough of you to go around. It is so easy to take the ferocity of zombies for granted, but when the back of the box says every shot counts, you believe it. As every shot taken, hell, every move made is a gamble. In Vanilla Flick 'em Up, you caw at the air when you miss a shot, goading your opponent in an attempt to choke them so they'll make the same mistake against you. But screw up here, and you give up to 3 rotters a chance to surround your team and devour you all. Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter understands that dexterity games thrive off of making mistakes. There are more slapstick elements coming out when a player makes an error they couldn't really help, but potentially making a game's highlights. And these moments of utter goofdom are here. You can perfectly flick the movement disc, so it's exactly where you need it to be, but it lines up in such a way that your pawn can't realistically shoot anything it needs to in that position. Or the zombie tower can perfectly pile up a stack of corpses right by a player's feet, narrowly missing them. Phew, that's quite the laugh, but I'm laughing through the pain. That's created just a whole other bunch of issues.
More comedic components start to creep out the longer you stick with the game. The flare that attracts zombies that needs flicking in the air. The shotgun that houses 4 tiny mini pellets that are utterly crap at long range, but astounding when in a Jill sandwich. The fact that this whole game might be taking place in a parallel version of Pawnee.
I rarely find games that balance tone well, and none of those handle such wildly differing emotions that are stretched to the edges of their spectrums like Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter. Sure, Flick 'em Up Dead of Winter does miss out on most of the narrative depth of its older sibling, but it manages to tell its stories with nothing but action and still hits emotional highs and lows thanks to the zombie tale. When I first got this out and started putting it together, I laughed at it. But now, well, I still laugh at it. But it's responsible for some of the most memorable games of this I have played, and has elevated what could have been a basic, silly spin-off into a remarkably good standalone game. And that makes it a glorious gimmick.